Do you think that, have you reread any of his plays? Because you went on a Wells kick a while ago where you watched a couple Wells interpretations of Shakespeare, and you said that both of them were better than the original play.
Well, yeah, I mean, Wells.
So
I mean,
I remember you saying that you thought that Shakespeare had a few great plays on him. Has your opinion changed as you've been writing drama?
I mean, I would again. I would say 7 or 8 of his plays. I could say you could make arguments for greatness. The first 2/3 to 3/4 of Julius Caesar, The Tempest, Othello. I'm trying to think of some of the others.
Hamlet?
You can make arguments for Hamlet. Macbeth, not so much. King Lear is very overrated. But there's
Anthony and Cleopatra?
Anthony and Cleopatra, yeah. And so, but again, the best of them, Othello, doesn't come close to O'Neill's best. And you know, one of the things that's a favorite meme of the last 100 years is how people will say, "Well, George Bernard Shaw, you know, he was always so envious of Shakespeare and whatnot, and he would put Shakespeare down." But the reality is, and not that I think, I mean, Shaw's an acquired taste, and he has his plays. He often opens them with these long monologues that obviously aren't acted out, but these long, you know, prose, philosophical de facto treatises. But you know, if you look at his 4 or 5 greatest plays by Shaw, Mrs. Warren's Profession, the one with the Salvation Army, Pygmalion, and a couple of others, they're better than Othello. I mean, the characters are richer and whatnot. Yes, there's a bit of tweeness and whatnot. Just in the same way, though, that I can say, and I could show play by play how I'm better than O'Neill or Williams or Miller. Shaw is obviously better than Shakespeare. Ibsen is obviously better than Shakespeare. O'Neill is obviously better than Shakespeare. You got to get out. But he was great for what he did in his day. Just like when if you look at the Greek tragedians, you know, whatever few plays survive. I mean, maybe less than 1% of the plays that were ever written and performed in ancient Greece survive to us. And the ones that are considered masterpieces, I mean, are not even as good as, you know, the mediocre Shakespeare plays. That's because we get more intelligent as a people, as a species. We have more to choose from. We learn from the past. It doesn't seem like it all the time, but you know, someone in 100 years, 200 years, is going to hopefully, you know, write something longer and greater than a Norwegian in the family. Someone is going to be better at write greater and deeper, more complex plays than I can now, even at my best. Now, it might not be the same person. You know, I think we've talked before about, you know, you are hard pressed to find someone who is a great poet and a great prose writer. Melville was a great prose writer. His poetry sucked balls. Whitman was a great poet. His prose was terrible. Sylvia Plath, the bell jar, is laughable, yet her poetry was great. There seems to be a divide. I've conquered that divide. Jessica has conquered that divide, not to the extent that I have. You know, she has maybe 30, 35 great poems or so versus 1,200 or so by me. And she hasn't written as much and whatnot, but she has conquered that divide. The person who writes more great poems than me probably won't also be writing great prose, but eventually they will. It might not be in 200 or 500 years, but 1,000 years or whatnot. But I have to believe that's the way it's going to be. Art and the artists get better. If they don't, then we're really in trouble.
And then 400 years, you'll have the equivalent of you saying what a hack you were in your time.
Well, no, I don't. I mean, they might point out that compared to, you know, other writers, you know, in the interim, that my plays are not as rich or whatnot. But anyone with any intelligence will be able to recognize that oh, this guy was so far beyond what anyone else was doing there, and that's why he's influenced so many other people. You know, it's one of those things that once you're safely dead, a more objective analysis can be brought forth. Now, you have, for example, people looking at T.S. Eliot or Ezra Pound and saying what fascists or anti-Semites they were, and that's true. You can say, you know, what is Wallace Stevens has a few plays with the word nigger in them, and so on and so forth. But that's this era, and in 50 or 100 years, even black poetry scholars will be like, well, okay, so Stevens used the N-word, and hopefully by then people will not be saying the N-word, and they'll freely say the word nigger when it's clearly not being used in a derogatory context. And they'll say, okay, so this white man who was born in the 19th century, died in the middle of the 20th century, used the word nigger. Okay, now let's look at his poetry. Let's get that out of the way. Big fucking deal. Is his poetry any good? And people will obviously have to say, yes, Stevens wrote, 3 or 4 dozen great poems, arguably. And that's the thing that you're going to judge him on, not whether or not, he was thought black people were inferior. Because that really...
Well, people already do that. As soon as things become Astoria, the perspective changes. Woody Allen right now is being grouped in with the Me Too movement and all this other nonsense. But, Caravaggio was a murderer, and I don't think that the public at large knows that. Those who love his paintings. They don't give a shit what he was as a person.
Yeah, and the two are obviously separate. If you judged everything in society by the people who did it, I'm not going to go to that store because they carry products that were made by slave labor in Manila. I'm not going to go to that restaurant because they use factory farmed fish, and I believe fish should swim free. I'm not going to go to this restaurant because the owner once made stupid anti-Semitic comments on Twitter. I'm not going to. If you do that, you'll be paralyzed. Human beings do stupid things.
Nowhere to eat.
Yeah, there's nowhere to eat. I'm not gonna sleep on this foam rug because on this foam mattress because that the process that makes the foam helps decrease the ozone layer or something. Well, you can't just. That kind of thinking is just so ridiculous. And the only people who do think in that way are these people who don't live in the real world themselves. People who have some severe mental problem. Yeah, I don't associate with people who are known racists. I'm not hanging out with rapists or pedophiles. But you don't have to expect me to say, every time that I come out or do a talk, say, before we talk about Lauren Isley, I just want to say that I am against nuclear war, I am against pedophilia, I am against the rape of women, and I think that the mid-Atlantic slave trade was an abomination. Oh yeah, and I don't like the Holocaust people too, those fucking Germans. I don't have to preface everything with something that should be obvious to any intelligent human being.